Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Kolkata Literary Meet, I'd like to welcome all of you here for this very special session with the legendary Ruskin Bond. We will be welcoming Mr. Bond very soon on stage. Another Kolkatan who's not living here anymore but is a well-known television personality will be in talks with Mr. Bond. Please welcome Ankita Mukherji. No, no.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very, very warm welcome in this nice and chilly Calcutta winter. Thanks to our friends, Jeet and Malabika, we've had this event of the Kolkata Literary Meet. We hope to have a lot more events over the next few years, maybe on subsequent days instead of a one-off event here. At the very beginning, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Pernod Ricard and Newbie Tea, without whose help we would not have been able to do this program. And it's our privilege and honor to welcome Mr. Ruskin Bond to the Calcutta Club. Round of applause for Mr. Bond, please. And may I welcome our senior most committee member, Mr. K.K. Biswas, to please come up on stage and present a small token of appreciation. K.K. The lovely coffee table book and the Calcutta Cup tie for Mr. Ruskin Bond. And the coffee table book and the scarf for Ankita Mukherji. I'm sure this is going to be a lovely evening, and may I request you to switch off your mobiles or keep them in the silent mode during the tenure of this program. I'd like to now hand over to Ankita to take charge of the proceedings. Thank you.
To all of you for being here tonight. There's just the wonderful little nip in the air that makes it the perfect winter evening in Kolkata. Perfect, in fact, for conversations about books, about cinema, and about all the wonderful anecdotes I'm sure Ruskin Bond will regale us with this evening. So thank you very much indeed, all of you, for being here tonight. And I hope we have a wonderful evening ahead. Now, I'm not going to go into all the cliches about how to introduce someone who needs no introduction. Suffice to say that he wrote his first book when he was just 17. It was published when he was 21. But for me, the truly staggering thing is that in the 60 years since that time when it was published, his first book, The Room on the Roof, has never been out of print. And in these six decades, he's written 500 other pieces, which include poems, memoirs, short stories, novellas, and of course, at least 40 books for children. And that's what perhaps makes him one of India's best loved authors. So it really is an absolute honor and privilege to be talking to him tonight.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned The Room on the Roof, and oddly enough, that's the one book that has not been filmed, and I don't suppose it ever will be. But I wrote it at a time when I was very much a movie buff and loved going to films. And I think I saw every film that was made in English back in the 1940s and 50s, and a few others too.
And in fact, there is that wonderful story about how you made a deal with the local movie house owner and you handed over some of your most precious possessions to him.
Right when I was still at school and couldn't afford to go to a movie every day, but I did this deal. The small cinema in Dehradun would keep playing the same record every day in the intermission, and everybody was fed up of it. So one day I took him my collection of gramophone records and, the old 78s and presented them to him and said, you can give us a change. And in gratitude, he gave me a free pass. So after that, I went every day to the cinema, and in those days they would change the program almost every day. So I saw hundreds of films free as a small boy.
Was there any that stood out that then inspired you for one of your plots?
Oh, yes. I used to like musicals and comedies. You don't get musicals now. And also films in those days, let's say going back to the 40s, 50s, a lot of films made in America or Britain would be based on novels, based on often on classics. So you would get almost, the entire works of Dickens filmed, Great Expectations, Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, and so on. And other writers too, like Daphne du Maurier with Rebecca, Somerset Maugham's novels. These writers, most of their work was filmed back in those years.
Well, this evening's session is titled The Bond Movies, so let's begin with those, and then, of course, we can broaden this to talk about other things as well. So 3 of Ruskin's works have been made into films. A Flight of Pigeons, a novella set during the revolt of 1857, which was made into Shambenegal's early classic, Junoon. The Blue Umbrella, a short story for children, which was made into the National Award-winning film by Vishal Bhardwaj of the same name. And Ruskin Bond and Vishal Bhardwaj also worked on a third film, a short story, Susanna's Seven Husbands, metamorphosed into this darkly comic Sat Khoon Maaf, which was also directed by Vishal Bhardwaj. But let me begin by asking you, Ruskin, did you have a bit of a chuckle when you saw the title of this session, The Bond Movies?
Well, yes. I know that I'm often asked about my connection with that super secret agent who stole my uncle's name, because I had an uncle called James Bond, but he wasn't a secret agent. He was a dentist. And his
so
grave...
he had a license to drill, if not a license to kill.
Right, and his grave is up in Missouri, and I wrote an epitaph for him, which goes, "Stranger approach this spot with gravity. James Bond is filling his last cavity." So that
But do you like the James Bond movies? Did you ever watch them?
I did see a few of them. Yes, they're entertaining. Right, true now.
But very different from the gentle, unhurried world of the Ruskin Bond movies.
Certainly, yes. They are. And I prefer to, though I don't have the figure for it, to compare myself to that fast bowler Shane Bond.
Indeed. Now, I can tell you of one contrast that struck me immediately between the 007 movies and one of your films. Now, James Bond has all the agency, he has the license to kill, it's a very male world. But in Susanna's Seven Husbands, which becomes Sat Khoon Maaf, it's the woman who has the license to kill.
Yes, I really took the legend of Bluebeard in a way and turned it around. You know, Bluebeard was this 16th or 17th century character who collected wives and then disposed of them when he got a bit fed up. So I, in a way, turned that legend around. Also, I had at the back of my mind maybe Chaplin's film Monsieur Verdoux, which was also based on the Bluebeard legend. But I took for my character a lady who had actually lived in Censura, which is the old Dutch colony up the Hooghly. And she'd lived there in the 1860s. And her grave is still there, her very large mausoleum. And the local people tell you that she was a very wealthy woman who had many admirers and several husbands, but they were mostly fortune hunters. And when she wanted to get rid of them, she did so in various ingenious ways, which in those days you could perhaps get away with things. And so I had a good time thinking of various ways in which he could dispose of these unwanted husbands. And um, not that I had in mind that modern women should be emulating her, but I wrote it as sort of tongue-in-cheek, sort of black comedy, and I'm not sure if that came over in the film. Perhaps it was rather black, too black.
Was it darker than you had originally conceived it? Because
Yeah,
after all,
yes,
you
I
have
feel
this
so.
quintessentially gentle humor, but Satkur Maaf ended up being very dark.
Yes, it did. And so perhaps, you see, it started as a short story of 5 pages. Then Vishal asked me to lengthen it into a novel-length story, which I did of about 80 pages. And he then turned it into a Hindi script and had a collaborator who made further changes. Um, so in the end, it was quite different maybe from my original concept. Now, this doesn't always happen. Let's say in A Flight of Pigeons, Sean Bennigal's adaptation of one of my stories, he hardly made a change at all. Nor did Vishal in The Blue Umbrella. It was just this particular story which suddenly underwent quite a few several scripts.
Authors don't always approve of the films based on their books. Nabokov apparently said about Lolita, the film Lolita, that it's the swerves of a scenic drive as perceived by the horizontal passenger of an ambulance. So did you ever feel that there was a big gap between your vision and Vishal's in Satkur Maaf?
Perhaps in that particular film, though in The Blue Umbrella, which he based on my children's story, he did catch I think, the lyrical element and the characters who are in the story and the feel of it. And also it was set up in the hills, so that gave it a very scenic background, and the photography was beautiful. And photography is so important, we don't always credit the camera work in a film for its success.
And I think The Blue Umbrella really was sort of poetry in motion almost. There are
Yes.
scenes when you see
Yes.
this frilly blue umbrella just dancing in the wind.
Perhaps it was.
And-
I think the problem nowadays is that feature films have to run to 3 hours,
Right.
and sometimes for a certain story or a certain maybe that's a bit too long. And I grew up on films which were usually an hour or 1.5 hours in length.
Did you think it was too long? Did you think The Blue Umbrella was too long?
Just a little bit, maybe.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about A Flight of Pigeons, on which Junoon is based. You wrote that in the early 70s, 1970s, and it's, of course, set against...
Yeah, about 78. It was filmed about, I think, 1978 or around,
Right,
around
right.
that time.
But it appeared in print before that in a magazine, I'm
Yes,
told.
yes, yeah, it did.
Shyam Benegal talks about how he came across this story in a magazine that was published at the time called In Print. And he was very excited by it, and he took it to Shashi Kapoor to show it to him, and that's how Shashi Kapoor decided to produce it. Tell us what happened after that.
He offered to buy the film rights from the story. And I was pretty well broke in those days, so I accepted the 10,000 rupees that they offered me. Fine, the film came out very well. I didn't do much on it, except perhaps give them some of the historical background, because this story is based on actual events, which happened in a small town called Shah Jahanpur in Uttar Pradesh, where in fact my father was born. And so what I wanted to show in it was that even in times of conflict and violence and war, human beings who were known to each other would help each other, even if they were from different communities, different backgrounds, different religions. And so that the girl who loses her father in the uprising is given, she and her mother are given shelter, um, not by one, but at least by two families from totally different backgrounds.
For all those of you who haven't seen Junoon, a quick recap. It's the story of the trials and tribulations of an English family, the Labadours, during the revolt of 1857. Most of the story is told from the perspective of Ruth, this teenage girl. She's the daughter of a British officer, and she actually witnesses her father being killed by a communal mob. And the rest of the novel is about how these two families shelter her, a Hindu family, Lala Ramjimal's family, and then they're kidnapped by this swashbuckling Pathan called Javed Khan, who is desperately in love with Ruth. And then, of course, the dynamics of that story play out. I won't give it all away because some of you might want to sort of revisit Junoon, and it's a wonderful film and entirely worth watching.
And the performances were very good. The acting, I thought, the actors were particularly good in it. It had in fact been recommended to Shyam Benegal by the famous Urdu writer Ismat Chugtai.
And she did the dialogues for
And
it
she
as
took
well.
a small role. She acted
And the
as-
role of
as
Ruth's
Granny,
grandmother.
As
Yes.
Granny, yes.
Yes.
Pearl Padamsee too had liked it and suggested it should be filmed.
The Labrador family finds unexpected kindness and generosity, as you say, from their neighbors and even their enemies. Would you say it's a particularly important story to revisit in our times,
Yes.
when neighbor sets upon neighbor based on the contents of their fridge?
Yes, I think it's very relevant today too, definitely. Which is one reason actually when I came across this accounts of this incident, I thought it's a story that should be retold, and not, for anybody, young and old.
And I think this was something you were asked in your earlier session as well. Do we need more stories that talk of tolerance?
Oh yes. Well, I think all good films, good books do um, stress the need for greater love and accommodation between different peoples.
But would you say
The
that
word tolerance is
yes,
getting misused,
is
or rather
getting
overused nowadays.
overused? All right, I take your point about that. And I'm sure you'll have to talk about that once again tomorrow because I
probably,
believe you're going to be part of a session on tolerance. But would you say, though, that A Flight of Pigeons, the book, and Junoon, the film, focused on somewhat different things? Because the book is definitely far more about the human relationships, about the power of love, but the
Yes.
film seems to make a few more political points. It talks about British atrocities on Indians in a way. It sort of portrays the Firangis, quote unquote, in a not very flattering light.
Well, I guess it was had to be a commercial film.
Right.
So to some, but I don't think it overdid that. And also it had to, I think, move along with a certain amount of action. Apart from in the story, it's only the opening scenes that are really show a lot of violence. But I think the director found it necessary to have battle scenes thrown in and people riding around madly on horseback with swords being waved around. So that I think was part of the commercial aspect of it.
And I think Nasiruddin Shah to this day talks about how anybody would want to do a role which requires you to be on horseback with a bandana flying in the wind, sword in hand, sort of cutting a wide swathe through meadows. So of course that always works. But tell us a little more about your partnership with Vishal Bhardwaj, because he's directed two films based on your books.
Yes, well, after The Blue Umbrella, we became good friends actually, and now he has a cottage in Missouri right next to mine, which he bought a couple of years back. So I see quite a lot of him, and we talk about films and his ideas and mine, and so perhaps I'll work with him again.
But were you already working with him on some projects?
We discuss different things, even other people's books, but because he's been busy with, with other projects just recently.
Right.
Um,
But
and
are we likely to see any other
and
Bond stories?
it was fun being with him on Saat Khoon Maaf, huh? Because since he wanted me to take a small guest role in it, I then accompanied the unit to Pondicherry and then to Mumbai, and it was a good experience.
Right. Now, you said you don't agree with the trend of writers and filmmakers returning their awards. You have quite a few yourself.
No, I wouldn't say I disagree with it.
Yes.
It's up to them. That it's entirely their business. If somebody wants to return an award or feel strongly about something, it's up to them. But you don't have to follow suit.
But would you at least agree that writers and creative people should have the freedom to offend without getting hauled up before court?
Yes, you to offend in which way? I mean,
People tend to get offended on all sorts of things at this present point. I ask this because you once had to fight an obscenity
Oh
charge.
yes, I did. Back in 1976, this was the year of the emergency, though it probably wasn't directly connected with that, except in a very remote way. But yes, I had published a story in a Mumbai magazine called Debonair. It was then edited by Vinod Mehta, who passed away a few months back. And someone or some people objected to it. And I found a policeman on my doorstep one day with a warrant for my arrest, and in those days they didn't give you bail very easily. So anyway, I had to appear in court in Bombay, and which I did, and this case dragged on for 2 or 3 years, and then the judge finally dismissed it and said he'd enjoyed the story. Thank you very much. So, so I think a lot of time gets spent in the courts, which could well be avoided.
You always get a judge who's a reader.
Yes, you need judges are very important people. So I think the more they read, the better. I think they'd be more sympathetic to writers anyway.
And the more everybody reads, the better, really.
Yes, certainly, yes. I think reading, if you're a good reader and you love books, you'll be a tolerant person.
And I think that's,
no doubt about it.
That really hits the nail on the head. But do you think your writing lends itself very easily to celluloid?
It does, I think, because I'm a very visual writer, and when I describe people, I try to help the reader to see them, and at least I'm told by readers that the scenes do come alive when I describe them. So, and having grown up on films too, I think that perhaps influenced me to some extent.
You say that your first novel, The Room on the Roof, hasn't, of course, been ever filmed, but it was a genre noir film that inspired you to write it. Is that correct?
Sorry?
A genre noir film, The River.
Oh, no. No, The River didn't inspire me to write The Room on the Roof.
Right.
But The River persuaded me to come back to India, in a way. I'd already written most of The Room on the Roof. You see, after finishing school, I was packed off to England, and I was living with relatives in the Channel Islands, but feeling very homesick for India. I wanted to come back to friends, family, places I'd grown up in. And this film was suddenly shown over there in St. Helier. And I was so, it brought me back to India, you see. So I saw it several times. I believe it also was a film that influenced Satyajit Ray, who when I came back to India, I had the good fortune to meet when he was making Kanchenjunga up in Darjeeling. So it did influence me, but not particularly the Room on the Roof, because that was already underway.
All right. Would you have liked Satyajit Ray to have made a film based on one of your books?
Oh, that would have been great, but I was a non-entity then, and a nobody. When I actually met him because I'd gone to Darjeeling in around 1960, 61, and I had a friend in a woman who'd written a biography of his, Marie Seaton. She was a great uh, disciple of his, and had earlier written a book on Eisenstein, the great Russian director.
Yes.
Uh, and had actually edited a couple of Eisenstein's films. And it was she who introduced me to him while he was making Kanchenjunga. Of course, I didn't get to know him. He was busy with the film. And it was very strange because at that same time, there was a Bollywood film being made in Darjeeling.
Yes.
It was called Professor, with, I think, Shami Kapoor and others. And it was very interesting to see the contrast in the methods that these different directors used. Satyajit was on the streets filming a very realistic scene. And the Bollywood crew was on the railway lines doing a song and dance scene. So, it was quite a contrast, actually.
Well, you say back in the 1960s you were a non-entity. Now, of course, we find that very hard to believe. But when would you say things really turned for Ruskin Bond, the author?
Perhaps, you see, publishing in India was really in the doldrums in the 60s and 70s. And it was hard to get you had to almost go abroad or publish abroad, if you wanted a book published. And then in the 80s, you got publishers like Penguin and others coming into India, and then Indian publishers also realized there was a lot of potential here for good books and literature. So things picked up then as Penguin came along and started reprinting all my old stories and novellas which had, been lying dormant for years. So suddenly I had an audience, and the readers were there. It's just that they hadn't been given anything to read, except for books published abroad. Yes, so things started picking up then, let's say, in the mid-80s.
And when did the children sort of adopt Ruskin Bond as their own?
I started writing books for children, actually in my middle age, in my 40s, early 50s. Before that, I took myself very seriously, and I was actually writing for the adult or general reader. And then with The Blue Umbrella, Angry River, and those were early children's books of mine. They were published abroad, but I also published them here. And so they started it. So every year I try to do at least one or two books for children. And a lot of my stories went into the school curricula too, which helped them to get well known. And I enjoy writing for children because you also get a good response from them. And kids often come up to me and tell me whether they liked or even disliked the story. Right?
And they're very forthright.
Oh yes, there was this girl who came up and said, "Sir, I like your ghost stories, but can't you make them, they're not scary enough," she said. "Can't you make them more frightening?" And then I realized that with the fare that you get on television nowadays, so many horror films, so much violence, so much, aliens and spaceships and monsters of all kinds, that it takes a lot to frighten a young kid now.
And certainly the gentle ghosts of Ruskin Bond
Oh,
stories.
my ghosts are very helpful and friendly, actually. In fact, they are, by and large. The ones I meet, they're always very nice.
Tell us about the ones you meet.
Well, there's this, sometimes at night time, I have difficulty sleeping. I get up a lot. Or my reserve falls off my bed. And I'm conscious of someone picking it up and putting it back on me and tucking me in. And I put on the light and there's nobody there. So there's just this very motherly ghost who, comes and takes care.
But where do you draw the inspiration of your ghost stories from? Is it living in the hills, the occasion, wonderful old haunted houses from colonial days?
They say that old houses usually harbor ghosts, but you can meet a ghost anywhere. You can meet a ghost anywhere. I believe this wonderful old club here it has ghosts roaming all over the place. And
sure
maybe before I go back tonight, I'll see one.
See a few here.
Especially after a glass of 100 pipers, which is, I believe, waiting for me around the corner.
I hope this isn't a hint to wrap up this session early because I have loads of questions left. But what do you do when you run out of ghosts?
No, the ghosts come at the end. When I run out of people, I write about animals. When I run out of animals, I write about uncles and aunts and relatives, eccentric relatives. We've all got eccentric relatives tucked away somewhere or the other. And so, and then when I run out of relatives, that's when I cook up ghost stories. And,
but speaking of relatives, Uncle Ken, of course, is such a big hit. Would you like to see stories with Uncle Ken filmed? Who would you imagine playing that character?
Difficult to say. I'm not very familiar with many of our actors, but perhaps you'd have a better idea. No, I think many of our actors and stars wouldn't want to act as a rather clumsy, ridiculous, inefficient uncle, but so it would be difficult casting him, I think.
All right. The Rusty stories, of course, have been adapted for television,
That's right,
if not
yes.
for the big screen. But which of your other children's writing would you like to see being made into films?
Perhaps, I think that a novel of mine called Maharani might make a interesting film. Again, it's got some humor, a black humor, as well as it's even got a ghost in it. Actually, we've been talking about films that have been made and seen, but I've had at least two stories that were filmed but never shown, because sometimes films just don't get seen, they don't get distributors. Many years ago, someone made a film called The Last Tiger, which was based on one of my stories. And I don't know, it must have been pretty bad because nobody wanted to show it. In fact, they used in it a circus tiger and expected it to act as a jungle tiger. And this tiger kept running away and going back to the circus. I think it missed the circus. Also, back in the circus, it used to get a regular meal every day. So it used to run away and go straight back into its cage. And so I think it didn't make a very convincing tiger. And then there was one of my ghost stories filmed, Ghost Trouble. Never saw it. I think the ghost did away with the film in the end. It never came out.
That was an effective ghost then.
So sometimes films are made and never seen. We only hear about the ones that are successful and get shown.
Well, let's talk a little more about the animals, because you have wonderful tiger stories, don't you? And in fact, you made up one as we were coming here, thanks to the hotel's proximity to the zoo.
Zoo, I thought, why not we have a story? We make a great film if the tiger escaped from your zoo, Calcutta Zoo, and made its way into the Taj Bengal at breakfast time, maybe looking for breakfast. I don't think it would be satisfied with with fried eggs and buttered toast. It might be more interested in some of the customers sitting there. But I think um, I don't I don't think I'd be very popular, no, if I had wrote a story about a tiger roaming around Calcutta streets. I wouldn't be invited here again, definitely. In the Calcutta club, I don't know. Would they allow a tiger in?
Oh, if
I
he
believe-
was wearing a dinner jacket and a tie, I think he'd.
Yes, I've got. I've been given a tie, and just at that period in my life when I was writing a story or an essay and saying ties should be abolished, especially for school children, because it really very uncomfortable having to be throttled all the time by a school tie while you're in class or coming and going. Ties. I haven't. I was scared to come here this evening because I heard that ties and dinner jackets were compulsory. But now it's the age of tolerance is here, so they let me in. Thank you. But I shall definitely treasure the tie, even if I don't wear it. Thank you.
You say your mother wanted you to join the army. Now, it's very frightening to think of a world without Ruskin Bond writing in it.
It would be frightening to have me in the army because Beetle Bailey would have a competitor. But the army has produced a lot of writers over the years, you know. You can think of some books like T.E. Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom and others, which were written by people who'd been through wars and served in. And some of our retired army people have also written great books.
Is there anything that you've read in the last few years that has really stood out for you among our new writers or people writing in India right now? Who would you say has stood out for you?
Offhand, I can't say. Actually, I don't now read a great deal of fiction, except I do still enjoy detective stories. I'm happy reading history and biography, books about maybe other writers or people who've done interesting things. So maybe as we grow older, our tastes change a little too. And I love reading books about famous actors, directors, people like that, connected with films too.
Right. All right, I'm going to now throw this open to the audience because I imagine there are a lot of people here with loads of questions for Ruskin Bond. So if we can pass the mic around.
Certainly, please. Oh, dim the lights. Then we can see the audience. Great.
All right, I see some hands at the back.
Yeah.
Okay, if we can get a mic across there to the person in the last row.
I have a question. When you were talking a little while ago about your brush with the police,
Yes.
I take it this is something to do with sensualist.
Pardon?
The sensualist.
Right, yes.
I was just thinking that would make a wonderful dark comedy film.
Yes, sir, you're right, it would. It could. It has, sensuality to begin with, but it's also got a certain tongue-in-cheek humor, and it's got, it moves along.
It's also very modern because it takes
Yes.
LGBT and
Well, I haven't, and it's a different sort of book for me, or a novel, because I haven't written another which is anyway like it. For one thing, I didn't want
Did your experience in court have anything to do with it?
yeah, I didn't want to get into trouble again. And you see this, and this very nice policeman came up from Bombay to Missouri with the warrant. He was very a nice chap. In fact, he was there 2 or 3 days, and I even took him to the pictures. We had a cinema, and we got on famously. But he had to go back without me because I managed to get bail. And when I came to Mumbai, there he was standing on the platform, wanting to make sure that I turned up in the remand court.
But did you ever regret not writing erotic thrillers, if we can call it that?
Well, now that I'm fairly well established as a children's writer, I wouldn't want to perhaps have a boy or a girl reading one day The Blue Umbrella and next day The Blue Bedspread. So now I'll stick with the kids and be a good boy.
Good evening. Good evening, sir.
Yes.
So my question is, I have always been fascinated by the character Susila. So would you tell me, was it a fiction or a fact? Another question, many of the stories and novels end with a line.
Yeah, you see
It is in time passing away, it is
right.
you and me.
Yes.
So could you elaborate on that line? It has always lingered
yes.
with me.
Sushila, she appears in 2 or 3 of my early stories. When I was in my 20s and early 30s, that was my romantic period, and I wrote love stories. And Sushila was based on a real person. But some of my love stories were based on dreams. In fact, a number of my stories are based on dreams. I don't know if there are many writers who use their dreams in that way, but I've often transferred a dream or transformed a dream into a story. We don't always remember our dreams, but I do make the effort when I do remember a dream, and I sometimes note it down. So in my journal, I often put down an interesting dream or a memorable dream that I've had, and sometimes it can be worked into a story.
Hello, Mr. Bond.
Yeah.
I have a very ardent and very personal question to you. Have you ever encountered the ghost in your personal life? How are these ghosts? Are they friendly or disturbing? Basically, I have spent my last 7 months with a ghost.
With a ghost?
Yeah, the ghost. And this ghost is a bit disturbing sometimes and bit friendly also at the same time. But I would like to know your personal experience regarding this.
I didn't catch the entire question.
What is your personal experience regarding the ghost,
With a
if you
ghost?
have any?
I have to confess that I do I do make up a lot of my ghost stories.
Not all of them.
No, not all of them, but it's nice to think of that we have a few ghosts around, but the world would be probably overpopulated with ghosts now, since over the centuries so many human beings have left this world and this existence to perambulate about in another one. It probably the world of ghosts must be pretty overcrowded by now. Anyway.
All right, we have a young questioner here.
Can I just ask while the mic comes out there? Yes,
We'd like to have one of Ruskin's young fans ask him a question, and then we'll come to you in a moment.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, where are you?
Here,
Yeah,
here.
you're right.
Second row.
Sir, would you have felt nice to have Uncle Ken accompanied you to England if he really existed?
If Uncle Ken, yes, he did finally go off to England, and there he didn't have all these sisters to support him, so he had to take a job as a postman. But he used to, a village postman, so he used to go around on a bicycle delivering letters. He usually read them before he delivered them, so he knew everything about everyone in the village, you know, and I wouldn't have put past a little blackmail would have been there. So he, in his last days, he had to work for a living. But I think he rather enjoyed being a postman.
Yes, there's a question here.
Hi, good evening, sir. This is Shobha.
Yes.
This is Shobha. I met you last August in Missouri. So
Right.
I've got a question for you. So whenever a thought comes to you in a flurry, do you think whether the audience will be accepting it, or do you just write it down and test it out? Because both The Sensualist and also The Room on the Roof is a little bold.
I didn't
And-
quite hear.
I think her question is, do you write for yourself first, or do you always have an audience in mind? She feels The Sensualist and The Room on the Roof are both very bold.
Very bold.
Yes.
I think most writers, to a great extent, do write for themselves, because you get pleasure from the right from having to of putting words together and sentences together and trying to create beauty with your language in a poetic sense. So certain writers do, I think, write for themselves a great deal, and I certainly do. And others who may be more objective or inventive writers perhaps have their audience in mind to a greater extent. Being a personal sort of writer, I think in my case it's a combination of both, because after all, writing is also a means of communication. And though I'll write for myself, I like to think that there's also somebody going to read what I'm writing and enjoy it as well. So I think it's a mixture of the two.
Hello, can I just ask my question now? Here,
Yes,
in
where are
the
you?
middle. In the
All
middle.
right, yes, go ahead.
Okay. Children now, they're very different from what they used to be. They are exposed to much more than you used to be exposed to as kids. Is it tougher being a children's writer now? Catching the attention of the children now? What would you think? I mean, was it easier in the past? I mean, earlier on to be a children's writer, or now it's much more tougher?
I know, I think basically writing for children, and what they really want is a good story. So, and you have to hold their attention right from page one. Otherwise, they're going to throw your book away. Whereas an adult might give you 2 or 3 chapters before throwing your book away. So I think the essential thing is to tell a good story, which will hold their attention, and to draw the child or the young reader into the story. He or she should be able to identify perhaps with one of the main characters. So I think if you go through children's literature over the ages, you find the books that survive are those that tell a good story. And I think that's the essential thing.
If I could just add on to that, and I'm sure you get asked this a lot, do you think children now have shorter attention spans than they used to before? And you could blame it on television, you could blame it on the internet, the fact that they're always on their gadgets. But do you think children read as much now as they did before?
Now that's an interesting question. Some of them won't read, others read a lot. I think, you see, reading, I've always felt, has been a minority pastime over the years. And even when I was a schoolboy, and we had a good library in our school, I was a great reader. But in a class of, say, 35 boys, it was a boarding school, there were just really 2 or 3 of us who were fond of books, who read them. And in those days, there was no television, there were no computers, there was no video games, none of all the things that we blame today as distractions. So what did you have? You could read comics, everybody read comics. You could go to the cinema once a month, and that was it as far as entertainment went. But even then, there were not many readers. So reading is, I think, it's a special, reading itself is a gift like writing. And not everybody does become a good reader. But once a reader, always a reader. And I admire those parents who I do meet sometimes who take the trouble to read to their very young children, because if somebody reads to you when you're very small, maybe you'll start reading for yourself at a certain point. And there also, I meet now and then good enlightened teachers who encourage children to read storybooks and books. So if you start at a young age, you would be a reader for life. But if you pass that age and you're suddenly, your interests have maybe of a different kind, I do occasionally meet even people in their 30s who suddenly discover books. So it's something that happens by chance too. But I think we're the lucky ones, those of us who read and love reading.
May I?
Yes, yes,
I
go ahead.
want to go back to a time about 42 years back when I had discussed the same thing with you. You may not remember at all. Do you remember a leopard that was killed around Missouri? A leopard which had attacked a lady in front of Woodstock School. And then the leopard was proclaimed and it was shot. I happened to be under training in Missouri, and I had seen that leopard many times. It never struck me as dangerous.
Well, it's still there. It must be the ghost of the leopard that's back now.
And you also, I find that you have written a story called The Leopard where it gets shot. But that was actually published in 72, which was a year before this thing actually happened.
There was another leopard.
That's it. Right.
There are leopards and leopards. I have one on even coming on my roof these days and clawing around. And one of my neighbors lost a dog just a few months back. So actually the leopard population has increased over the years. Leopards are great survivors. Unlike tigers, who sort of are animals of the grasslands and open plains, so they don't conceal themselves so well. But leopards live in the plains, in the forests of plains. They live in the hills. They don't emerge much in the day. They can climb trees. They can climb steep hillsides. So we hear of leopards occasionally being killed. But they are definitely on the increase. It's the one animal that is not dying out by any means.
Right. All right, I think we have
It's a very small...
Just a moment. May I just identify the next person to take a question from? Yes, in the second row.
Good evening, sir. My question is that if Mahmood was still alive, here, what would you ask him to cook for you?
Okay,
Mahmood, yeah.
I wrote this little book called Tigers for Dinner, in which our cook used to be also Jim Corbett's cook, the great hunters. And so, thank you for asking me, what would I like for dinner? What would I like for dinner today? A roast turkey with a nice bottle of wine, and followed with a nice sort of Christmas pudding or something. You've increased my appetite. I'm feeling hungry now. Thank you.
Just one small question.
Yes, we can't really. Can you just dim these lights so that we can see the audience? Yes, very
how
quickly.
you build?
Just a moment. We have one more question here, and then we'll come to you. Yes, go ahead.
Sir, I'm a very big fan of yours, and there's just one question I have. Like the journals that you write, like we have these books called The Rain in the Mountain, The Book of Nature. So we see nature plays such a very important role in those short stories that we've read. So, sir, what inspires you to write about nature?
Well, yes, I'm also very close to nature, and I get a lot of satisfaction and pleasure from being close to trees, forests, mountain streams, wildflowers, birds and small creatures. And when I came to live in the hills, the first house I lived in was right in the forest. So I did, I could see the changing world of nature every day. And all I have to do is take a walk and see it now too. So it has played a very great part in my writing, and hopefully will continue to do so. And you can never get bored if you're interested in nature, because the natural world is changing around you all the time.
And so Richard Jefferies is one of your favorite writers who, like,
Yes.
there's one story, there's a book actually, it's called, if I'm not mistaken, you've like taken an excerpt from that Richard Jefferies book and you've, mentioned it. So
Yes, the
can you
story,
just name,
the
yes,
story of my heart. I
the
think
story
it's
of
called.
my heart.
Hmm?
So could you just recommend some more writers, like who
Yes.
inspired you to take up the...
Yes, yes. Apart from the story of my heart, well, if you could read Walden by Thoreau, he goes into the woods. He lives by this pond for over a year. That was an American writer in the 19th century, and then you have a lot of nature writers in the West. Then there's a short story writer, H.E. Bates, and nature plays a great part in his novels and short stories too. And so if you'll discover a number of writers who are close to nature.
I think we have a lot of questions over there. Again, if you can dim the lights, because we can't really see the audience at all. Yes, I see two hands over there in red. Yes, the gentleman in red.
Yeah, how you build the sequence, thrilling sequence. How you build the thrilling sequence in your novel. And another question is, what is your best novel, according to you?
I can't say what's my best novel. That's for the readers to decide. But what was the first question? Did you get it?
How you build the thrilling sequence in your thrilling sequence?
Feeling people?
Thrilling.
Oh, the thrilling sequence. What about the thrilling sequence? Sorry. Oh, how do you build up to a thrilling sequence?
Oh, how do you build up to a thrilling sequence? It depends on the kind of story you're writing or the book you're writing. If you want to build up a certain amount of suspense, I think it's a matter of practice, and you gradually learn these techniques. Especially if you want to write a mystery story or a detective story or a thriller, there you have to build up a certain amount of suspense. And that's not easy to do. Whereas other books, if you don't necessarily have to have a thrilling climax, it's not like a film or a movie where you have to have a climax. You can even go backwards in time. So it depends a great deal on the kind of book you're writing.
All right, I think we have time for just one more question.
Excuse me. I had a question.
Okay, sorry.
I had a question that
Okay,
where
I
did you
think-
get the idea of the Oliver's Diary?
Sorry?
Where did you get the idea for Oliver's Diary?
Yes.
Oh, Mr. Oliver's Diary, yes. Yeah, I enjoyed writing that. Well, we had a teacher like that when I was at school, in prep school. So I've sort of developed his character, and just as I did with Uncle Ken, I've woven stories and anecdotes around him. I think children, if they want to read a book about teachers, they would prefer it to be an eccentric teacher, just as they would rather have an eccentric uncle than a serious one.
Okay, we're going to take one last question.
Sir?
All right, the lady here has a question. Can we give the mic to her, please?
Good evening. Sir, can I ask you just one question?
Yes.
Sir, I'm a great fan of yours, and you are my ideal, my inspiration, and I'm a writer too just because of you. And I have just this very personal question to you. Who is the closest Rusty to you? Whom you feel connection with one of those Rusties you have written in your novels, and who is the most closest to your heart?
Well, it's the Rusty of The Room on the Roof who's probably closest to my heart, because The Room on the Roof was written at a period in my life when I was really missing the people I loved. So a lot of its passion and intensity went into it. And at that age, when you're 16, 17, you are far more sensitive than you become when you're older. So I think I captured that sensitivity and passion in The Room on the Roof.
So how autobiographical is Rusty?
Again, The Room on the Roof was based on a journal, but I fictionalized it. I had to turn it into a novel and give it a plot and bring in a few other characters, create a few characters. So, as with much of my writing, it's a mixture of...
Semi-autobiographical. Yes, the lady here has been waiting for a very long time. Can we get a mic across to her?
Thank you.
Sir?
Yes.
All right, may I just say, I'm identifying the people who will ask the questions, and all of you might get a chance afterwards to come and pose your questions, but we really don't have much more time left. So could we have...
Can I ask?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, assuming causality is correlation, you said that around the mid-80s was your beginning of growth. Now, I remember The Night Train to Delhi was one of the books that was described in the ICSE, ISE book reading. Was there any rise of your prominence related to your books being part of these curriculum?
It could have helped. You see, The Night Train at Deoli was one of my early stories. Actually, I wrote it in 1956, just after The Room on the Roof. And in those days, there weren't many anthologies being published in India. So after its magazine publication in the Illustrated Weekly, it lay dormant for some time. Then in 1987, Penguin Book published it in a collection called The Night Train at Deoli and Other Stories, which did quite well. And it was then picked up and included in the collection you referred to, which was then prescribed in schools. So it all happened around that time. So certainly, if a story gets into a school book, it would help it to be better known.
Right, this is absolutely the last question we'll be taking this evening, the lady here.
I've been trying for such a long time to get your attention. One short question, that Deoli, Night Train at Deoli, is it a real place or it exists in your imagination?
Deoli?
Yeah.
Well, I looked up the road map of India and I found it recently. I found that there are 3 Deolis. I thought I'd invented the name, and then I discovered recently that actually there are 3 Deolis.
And are they anything like the Deoli of your invention?
Well, they are small places, one in Madhya Pradesh and one in Rajasthan.
Was it your real experience, the Night Train at Deoli?
Did I really experience it? Now that's one of the stories that's based on a dream.
It looks like you. Another question.
All right, one question per person, please. I think we'll just leave it at that. Please, you can see the long line here of people who want to speak to.
One short question, one very short question.
Sir?
Please give me.
Okay, there's a little boy here who's had his hand up for the last 5 minutes at least. So would you please give the mic to him, and that will be.
Give me a little time. I have been trying for half an hour.
Well, one question. I think we have to be democratic about this.
Sir, in our English book, we have your short story, The Black Cat.
Again,
Yes, The Black Cat.
Nobody's
So,
allowing me
what
to
has inspired you to write that story?
In the middle,
Maybe, I can't remember, but maybe the black cat itself. I don't know.
No, please, please.
All right. I'd like to thank all of you for being here tonight. It's getting chillier, and I think we let Ruskin off as well. But thank you very much for giving us your wonderful stories and talking a little about cinema as well.
One short question I must
No,
ask.
please, come and ask him whatever you want to. But thank you all. You've been a wonderful audience.
You can always write to me,
And
maybe I'll reply. I'll try.
The people are always asking questions before I can ask. One more question I'll ask. Please, Mr. Bond, please.
Quickly.
So please ask it.
Please, I'm asking one question. There is a very remarkable story. I'm fond of all your stories.
Yeah, please, no preamble, just the question.
Yes, the question is that a small school boy, the teacher was passing through the jungle. He was crying in the jungle. And when he lifted his up, the teacher saw it's a disc, no face, nothing.
I'm sorry, your voice is faded out. So.
There is a story of a small schoolboy crying in the jungle, and the suddenly teacher said, "Why are you crying?" The boy lifted up his face, then he saw that it was only a disc.
That's a very well-known story of mine.
Yeah, very well known. Has it got any experience of your own?
Well, I still have my face.
And I saw
Thank you, ma'am. I think, you must notice the line that's been forming, and it's a little selfish to just continue this conversation. Please line up if you have further clarifications. I'd like to thank Mr. Bond, Mr. Ruskin Bond, for a wonderful, wonderful evening. And could a volunteer please take that mic away? And I would like to thank 100 Pipers afterwards for supporting all these events which we've been doing in the evenings for the last 5 years. And thank you on behalf of Tata Steel Kolkata Literary Meet. I thank Calcutta Club for being a wonderful host and venue. So I would now request Newbie, who's also partnered this event, I'd request Mr. Kunal Biswas to just give a little memento of tea to Mr. Bond. So thank you everyone, and hope to see many of you tomorrow when we start our program at the Victoria Memorial at 1:45. And kids, there's another writer, Nandana Sen, who will be doing a session at the Lakes tomorrow at 11:30. Have a great evening. Signing will be on the stage, so if you could please line up here.